In the San Luis Valley of Colorado, in the fall of 1891, every sensible person was buying wood. Not just firewood, building wood, railroad pine, sawn planks, studs, clapboard, anything that could be hammered together before the first hard freeze came down from the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. Everyone understood the rule of that country. If you wanted to survive winter, you built fast, sealed every crack, and kept the stove hungry. Everyone except Maria Adelina Vega. She was not buying studs. She was not stacking fresh pine against her north wall. She was not begging the railroad depot for another load of boards before the snow closed the pass. She was standing barefoot in a pit of mud. Into that mud she mixed chopped rye straw, sand from the dry wash, and a powdery gray dust she had saved from burned sheep bones and kiln ash. Beside her, rows of thick earth bricks lay drying in the thin autumn sun, each one as heavy as a sleeping child. From the road it looked like poverty. To the men who had just spent half their savings on bright new lumber, it looked worse than poverty. It looked like refusal. Gideon Pike, the valley's loudest lumber broker, stopped his wagon beside her place, and laughed before he even climbed down. "Mrs. Vega," he called. Winter is not impressed by mud. The two carpenters riding with him grinned. One of them pointed at the stacked adobe blocks and said, "That house will melt the first time it hears snow." Maria did not look embarrassed. She only lifted another brick from its mold and set it in the sun. "No," she said. "It will listen to the sun before the snow comes." That answer made the men laugh harder. But 3 months later, the thermometer outside Pike's lumber office froze so hard the glass split. When frame houses across the valley turned their walls white with frost. When families woke to ice on the inside of their blankets, Gideon Pike would walk up to Maria Vega's mud house with his glove off, and his pride already breaking. Because the chimney was cold, the stove was out, and the wall beneath his palm was not. To understand why an entire valley mocked the one house that would protect a family best, you have to understand the mistake those settlers were making. Asking one question over and over: how do we stop heat from leaving? Maria Vega was asking a better one. Where can we make heat stay? She had grown up farther south, in a line of people who knew earth as more than dirt. Her father had repaired mission walls. Her grandmother had built ovens that held yesterday's fire into the next morning. Her uncles knew which clay cracked, which sand tightened a wall, which straw made a brick breathe instead of crumble. Maria did not use words like thermal mass. Nobody in that valley did. But her hands knew it. They knew that a thick earth wall did not warm quickly. And that was the point. The house behaved like a nervous animal. Feed the stove, and the room jumped hot. Let the fire fall, and the cold came back with teeth. The air warmed fast, because air was light. It also forgot fast, because air had almost nothing inside it to hold heat. A plank wall could slow the cold a little. A well-chinked log wall could slow it more. But most homes in the valley had the same weakness. They had almost no memory. They only felt warm while something was actively burning. Maria's adobe wall was different. It was 2 feet thick in some places, built from thousands of pounds of earth, sand, straw, and mineral ash. The day, the low winter sun struck the southern face of the house and soaked into it slowly. In the evening, when she fired the small iron stove, the heat did not only warm the air, it disappeared into the wall. Not lost, stored. The wall took heat the way a dry field takes rain. Slowly, deeply, without making a show of it. Then, long after the fire had gone quiet, when the room air began to cool, the direction changed. The wall became warmer than the air around it. It began giving back what it had taken. Not as a blast, not as a roar, as a steady, silent return. A house made of light materials must be fed constantly. A house made of heavy memory can be charged. That was the principle hidden in Maria Vega's mud. But in October, nobody cared about principles. They cared about speed, status, and fear. The railroad had reached the valley 2 years earlier, and with it came a new kind of confidence. Men who once would have built low earth houses now wanted framed homes with tall walls, glass windows, and clapboard faces clean enough to prove they were no longer poor. The lumber itself became a symbol. Fresh boards meant modernity. Mud meant backwardness. Gideon Pike understood that better than anyone. He sold lumber, coal, stovepipe, window sash, tar paper, and the story that all of it meant progress. His office stood beside the depot, painted green, with a brass bell over the door, and a sign that read, Pike Building Supply and Fuel. He did not just sell warmth. He sold the fear of being left behind. That was why Maria irritated him. Every Adobe brick she lifted from the mold was a board not bought from him. Every wall she raised from earth was an insult to the valley's new religion of milled pine. By the first week of November, her neighbors had given the place a name. The Clay Coffin. Children shouted it from the road. Carpenters repeated it at the blacksmith shop. Even kind women said it with pity, as if Maria had made a sad choice, and would learn soon enough. Her brother-in-law begged her to stop. Sell the mule, he said. Buy Pike's lumber. He'll put up a frame before the bad weather. Maria kept smoothing wet clay between bricks. My husband built thin walls, she said. I buried him after a winter of cutting wood, until his hands bled. That ended the conversation. Her first winter in the valley had taught her more than any man's opinion could erase. Her husband, Tomas, had built them a quick board shack when they arrived. It was considered practical. It was also nearly unlivable. The stove made the air near it harsh and dry, but the corners stayed bitter. Their baby's wash water froze under the table. Frost grew around nail heads like pale flowers. The whole structure creaked as if the cold were prying at it with invisible tools. Tomas cut wood before dawn and after dark. He cut until his lungs burned. He cut until one cough became many. By March, the fever took what the winter had weakened. So when men told Maria that mud was foolish, she heard something underneath their laughter. She heard the sound of an axe in frozen timber. She heard her husband coughing into a blanket. She heard the tiny crack of ice forming in a water cup beside a sleeping child. She was not building to impress the valley. She was building against a memory. The work was slow. It had to be. She mixed clay in the pit, with her heels, and a wooden hoe, folding straw into the mud until the fibers vanished through it like veins. She pressed the mixture into wooden molds, knocked the molds free, and left the bricks to stiffen under the high desert sun. When the night sharpened, she covered the new bricks with old canvas. When early frost threatened, she woke before dawn to brush ice crystals from their edges. The walls rose by inches, not high and proud like Pike's frame houses. Low, thick, patient. She made the south wall heavier than the others. She set deep window openings there, not large enough to bleed heat, but angled to catch the weak winter sun. Bleed heat, but angled to catch the weak winter sun. Inside, beneath those windows, she built a long earthen bench, blackened with soot and sealed with lime wash. It looked like a place to sit. It was also a heat bank. The carpenters found that hilarious. A bench that thinks it's a stove. One of them said, Maria only kept working. By December, most of the valley had finished its preparations. Wood piles stood beside cabins like small forts. Pike's yard was nearly empty, which pleased him. Every load sold meant another family depended on what he supplied. Boards to keep the cold out, fuel to keep the stove fed, tar paper to patch the failures. Maria's house had no proud porch, decorative trim. No clapboard shine. It sat low against the land, pale brown and quiet, with walls so thick the windows looked like tunnels. Inside, it felt strange. Not hot. That disappointed people who stepped in expecting a miracle. The air was comfortable, but not dramatic. No one gasped. No one sweated. The small stove did not roar. Maria did not feed it all day. She burned it hard in the morning. Let the fire bite clean and bright for a short while. Then let it fall. She did the same in the evening. Her children began sleeping farther from the stove. That was the first private proof. In a thin house, winter arranges the room. The safest place is always near the iron belly of the stove. Chairs migrate there. Beds migrate there. People surrender the corners. In Maria's house, the corners came back into use. Her daughter Lucia could sit against the north wall and mend a stocking without her fingers aching. Her son Raphael could leave a cup of water on the floor and find it liquid at dawn. Beans left in a clay pot on the earthen bench stayed soft enough to stir the next morning, though the stove had been out for hours. These were not spectacles. They were small revolutions. Then January arrived. For 3 days the sky stayed empty and metallic. The mountains vanished behind a white haze. Birds disappeared from fence lines. Even sound seemed to shrink. On the 4th night, the cold dropped into the valley like a lid. Sunrise pumps were frozen, wagon axles screamed, and the breath from livestock hummed so thick in barns that lantern light turned it gold. The thermometer at the depot read 28 below before the mercury column stopped moving. Later that morning, it shattered. The cold did not blow. That was what made it terrifying. There was no storm to curse, no wind to brace against. The cold simply occupied everything. It entered hinges, barrels, boots, lungs. It made rope stiff as wire. It made flour bins smell faintly of metal. It made men angry, because anger was warmer than fear. Across the valley, stoves burned without rest. At the O'Malley place, a framed housepike had praised as the future of the valley. Frost formed behind the wallpaper in a pattern so exact it revealed every stud. Mrs. O'Malley hung quilts over the walls. By noon, the quilts were stiff at the edges. At the blacksmith's cabin, the water bucket froze 3 inches deep though it sat 6 feet from the stove. At Pike's own office, the ink in the ledger thickened into black tar. He held the bottle above the stove until the glass cracked in his hand. And still, nobody went to Maria Vega's house. Pride can be colder than weather. 6th day of the freeze. A freight sled from the depot tried to cross the open road north of the Vega place. Gideon Pike had insisted on sending it. A mining camp needed stovepipe and coal sacks, and delay meant someone else might take the contract in spring. The teamster warned him the horses were spent. Pike told him the horses did not read invoices. Half a mile past Maria's house, the lead horse slipped on rutted ice and went down hard. A trace chain snapped. The sled lurched sideways and buried one runner in a drift packed almost as hard as stone. The men worked for 20 minutes before their fingers began to fail. The farrier could not set a new shoe because the nails stuck to his lips when he tried to hold them there. A man dropped a wrench and left skin on it when he picked it up barehanded. The little coal pan they lit under the tools smoked weakly and died. Pike looked across the white field and saw the low adobe house. No smoke came from the chimney. His first thought was ugly. He thought she had finally learned. But then the door opened. Maria stepped out wrapped in a dark wool shawl, her face calm in the killing cold. Behind her, for one brief second, Pike saw the impossible thing. A child in shirt sleeves crossing the room. Not near a roaring stove. Not huddled under blankets. Maria lifted one hand. The gesture was not victory. It was invitation. That made it worse. The men carried their frozen tools into her yard. Maria opened the shed and let the farrier bring his portable anvil near the south wall, where the pale earth had been facing the winter sun all day. He leaned back while working, shoulders touching the adobe. Then he frowned. "Wall ain't cold," he muttered. Pike heard him. He wanted not to hear him. The farrier touched it again with the back of his wrist. By God, it ain't cold. Pike took off one glove. The air bit instantly. His fingers ached before he even reached the wall. Did the usual cruelty of winter masonry, the dead pull of something frozen through. Instead, his palm met a surface that felt almost alive. Not warm like a stove, warmer than the world had any right to be. There was no sharp theft of heat from his skin. No bite, no shock, just a mild, stubborn presence. The wall had been drinking heat for weeks. Sun by day, stove by morning and evening. Bodies, cooking, lamplight. Every little source had entered the mass grain by grain. Now, while the valley's wooden houses forgot heat as soon as the stove weakened, Maria's walls remembered. Pike stood there with his hand on the evidence, and felt the business he had built begin to rearrange inside his head. Inside the house, the proof became harder to dismiss. The stove held only gray ash. No flame, no red coals. Yet the room was steady. Not hot, not smoky, not desperate. The kind of steady that made a man notice his own exhaustion. Lucia was rolling dough on the table. Raphael was reading beside the earthen bench. On the deep window ledge sat an earthen water jar, its surface damp and unfrozen. Beside it, a small bowl of lard remained soft enough for Maria to press with one finger. Pike thought of his office ink. He thought of the O'Malley wallpaper blooming frost. He thought of the cords of wood disappearing from every yard in the valley. He heard himself say, "How much wood are you burning?" Maria wiped flour from her hands. "Less than 1 stick in 4, she said. Compared to last winter. The farrier laughed once. Not because it was funny, but because his mind needed somewhere to put the shock. Pike did not laugh. He had sold the valley a war plan. Build light, burn constantly, fight the cold every hour. Maria had built a truce with physics. That evening, after the horse was shod and the freight sled freed, Pike did not go straight back to the depot. He stood outside Maria's house, watching the last sunlight fade from the south wall. He expected the magic to leave with the sun. It did not. The surface cooled slowly, almost reluctantly. He understood then that the house was not warm because the day was warm. The day had been murderous. Warm because mass changes time. It stretches heat across hours. It delays loss. It turns a short fire into a long consequence. That was the secret his lumber yard could not sell by the board foot. Within a week, the story spread. Not the version Maria would have told. The valley made it louder, stranger, almost supernatural. They said her walls made their own heat. They said she had buried stove coals inside them. They said Mexican mud carried desert warmth even in snow. All of that was wrong. The truth was better. The walls did not create heat. They protected time. They took warmth when warmth was cheap, and returned it when warmth was scarce. End of winter, the insults changed shape. Men still called the house the clay coffin sometimes, but now they said it with less certainty. A few asked Maria what ratio of sand she used. One asked if his frame house could be given mud lungs. Mrs. O'Malley came with a basket of eggs and left with instructions for an earthen interior wall behind her stove. Pike came last. He arrived with no carpenters, no jokes, no wagon full of sales talk. He brought a notebook. Maria met him outside. For a long moment, neither spoke. The valley around them glittered under a hard crust of snow. From the depot, smoke rose from chimneys that had not rested in days. Pike cleared his throat. "Your house," he said. Maria did not rescue him from the discomfort. "Yes," she said. He looked down at the notebook. "I have lumber," he continued. "I have tar paper. I have coal. But I do not have what you know." There it was, the real surrender. Not that mud had beaten wood. Not that old had beaten new. The real defeat was that Pike had mistaken a market for wisdom. He had believed the material moving through the railroad must be superior, Because it was modern, measurable, and profitable. Maria had trusted something quieter, the behavior of heat inside matter. Over the next month, she showed him what she had done. Not as a secret, as a system. All thickness mattered, the sun exposure mattered, the lime wash mattered, the roof overhang mattered, the bench mattered, the firing pattern mattered most of all. You could not treat a high-mass house like a thin one. If you waited until you were cold, you were already late. You charged the mass before the need. You let heat enter slowly. You stopped chasing comfort minute by minute and started managing it day by day. By spring, Pike had changed the sign in his yard. Not completely. A man does not abandon profit just because he learns humility. But beneath Pike Building's supply and fuel, he added a smaller board. Adobe forms, lime wash, and south wall plans. Carpenters hated it at first. Then they noticed who was buying less firewood. The following winter, 3 new houses in the valley had thick earthen stove walls. 2 had sun benches. 1 had a full adobe back room attached to a wooden front house. None of them performed exactly like Maria's place. Because copying a shape is not the same as understanding a principle. But the valley had learned the first lesson. Warmth was not only something you burned. It was something you stored. That idea sounds simple now, but it still gets forgotten. Modern homes often chase comfort with faster machines, bigger furnaces, thicker insulation, smarter thermostats. Those things can matter. Insulation matters. Air sealing matters. Good systems matter. But thermal mass asks a different question, not just how much heat leaks out. How much useful heat can the building hold, delay, and return? A stone floor in winter sun, a masonry heater, a thick interior wall, a concrete slab designed correctly, even a humble adobe bench beside a window. These are not magic. They are thermal batteries. And, like all batteries, their value depends on how they are charged, and when they are allowed to discharge. Maria Vega did not beat winter because she rejected progress. She beat it because she refused to confuse newness with understanding. The railroad brought boards into the valley. It brought glass, coal, iron stoves, and the promise of speed. Some of that promise was real. But the cold did not care what was fashionable. It obeyed deeper laws. Heat moves. Mass remembers. And a house that remembers heat can feel like mercy. When the world outside forgets the meaning of warmth. This story is a historically inspired reconstruction for education and storytelling. The characters and specific events are fictional, but the building principles are based on real traditions of earthen construction, solar gain, and thermal mass. Anyone applying similar ideas today should follow modern building codes, safety standards, and qualified professional guidance.